Welcome everyone. I am here today before you people to talk on Alfred Tennyson's poem In Memoriam as an elegy and the representative voice of the Victorian age. In Memoriam, one of the greatest poems of the Victorian era, is an elegy written by Tennyson on and after the death of his closest friend and Cambridge contemporary Arthur Hallam. It is a long poem of 131 separate lyrics with a prologue at the head of these lyrics and followed by an epilogue. It was in 1828 that Tennyson met Arthur Hallam in his second year at Trinity College, Cambridge. Now, the meeting got cemented into lasting friendship. They had a few traits in common. Both of them had inherited remarkable ability. Hallam was the son of an eminent historian, as Tennyson was the son of a rector. In their intellectual faculties too, both of them were highly developed and advanced. Their college intimacy ultimately brought them closest to both their families, and Hallam became engaged in marriage with Emily, Tennyson's younger sister. It seemed to be but the beginning of a beautiful, happy life when suddenly the end came. Arthur Hallam was traveling with his father in Austria when he died suddenly with scarcely a warning sign of illness. Now let us know what is an elegy. The word elegy comes from the Greek word elegos, which means a dirge or a funeral song. Hence, an elegy is a poem in which the poet expresses his grief and sense of loss. The entire poem In Memoriam, which was composed between 1833 and 1850, was inspired by a deep personal grief over the death of Arthur Hallam. John Milton's Lycidas, P.B. Shelley's Adonais, and Matthew Arnold's Thyrsis are the great elegies written in the pastoral convention, whereas Tennyson, in his Memoriam, has expressed his grief directly, and it is occasionally that he strikes the pastoral note. In Memoriam is a stream of personal tears that has rolled on universal cheeks. Here the inspiration is personal, application is universal. To understand the poem is to understand the meaning and the purpose of man's earthly existence. To justify the thoughts contained in the poem is to justify the victory of the eternal over the corporeal. The theme of the poem is Tennyson's sorrow on the death of his friend Arthur Hallam. But the way in which the poet has expressed his sorrow is not conventional. It is a sincere, philosophical and spiritual change that we see at the end of the poem. That is in section 131. O living that shalt endure, when all that seems shall suffer shock, rise in the spiritual rock, flow through over depths and make them pure. In Memoriam, Tennyson has also discussed the value of immortality. He seems to believe in the immortality of the human soul, but here and there are lurking doubts. However, these are only the earlier sections of the poem. Later, as the poet matured and understood the phenomenon more and more seriously, he came to the conclusion that man does not die. Tennyson, as the representative poet of the Victorian England. In every age, there is a poet who represents in his poetry the spirit of that age. Tennyson, in his poetry, especially in Memoriam, expresses the spirit of the Victorian age. Robert Browning, another literary giant of the Victorian era, shows no awareness of contemporary social changes and trends which revolutionized both theology and religion. Tennyson stands in the same relation to his times as does Geoffrey Chaucer to the 14th century and Alexander Pope to the early 18th century England. Thus, a famous critic of Tennyson, W.J. Long, observes, Tennyson was not only a man and a poet, he was a voice, the voice of the people, expressing in exquisite melody their doubts and their faith, their griefs and their triumphs. He carries on to say, as a poet who expresses not so much a personal as a national spirit, he is probably the most literary man of the Victorian era. The three important movements of the Victorian age were: first one, Industrial Revolution; the second one, the rise of democracy; and the third one, the rise of evolutionary science, that is Darwin's theory of evolution and its impact on religion. In all these matters, Tennyson's views are characterized by the famous Victorian compromise or the avoidance of extremes. The Victorians craved for law, for order, for peace and stability. The dominant element in Tennyson's thought is his sense of law and order. He believed in disciplined, ordered evolution rather than in revolution. As a result of the Industrial Revolution, the country was enjoying an unprecedented economic prosperity. This mammon worship of his age was reflected in his poem Maud. It reflects the commercial prosperity of England at a time when Britain's sole god was a millionaire. The democratic spirit of the age is reflected in poems like The Princess. Now about religious skepticism and compromise. The rise of science resulted in religious skepticism, doubts, anxieties and uncertainties. And Tennyson was a typical Victorian in his efforts to reach a compromise between science and religion. Thus in his famous passage of In Memoriam he writes, "Let knowledge grow from more to more, and more of reverence in us dwell, that mind and soul according well may make one music as before." The poet is full of aplomb. This is the reason that at another place he writes, "Oh, yet we trust that somehow good will be the final goal of ill, to pangs of nature, sins of will, defects of doubt and taints of blood." Tennyson would have science, but he would also have religion, and he would have the two work in harmony for the realization of the Victorian dream of progress unlimited. Tennyson did actually arrive at a compromise which the Victorians had desired him to do. The poet took a pragmatic and non-quixotic approach towards life after his princess' death. In some sections of the poem and stanzas of In Memoriam, he put forward the claims of science. He upheld the theory of evolution propounded by Charles Darwin and supported the view that honest thought is better than blind faith. To quote him, "There remains more faith in honest thought, believe me, than in half-breeds." In others, he emphasized the claims of religion, God and soul. He triumphantly exhibited his faith in God and immortality of the soul and in life beyond death. He advised the people of his age to cling to faith beyond all form of faith, trust and hope, to look into one far-off divine event to which the whole creation moves. Thus, we find that Tennyson's In Memoriam is essentially a collection of lyrics that voice the poet's melancholy, doubts, anxieties, fears, as well as philosophy and hope. We can easily say that the poem In Memoriam is a compendium of grief, doubt, and victory. The poems in it are lyrics of the finest order which have been praised by one critic after another for their simplicity, for their music and melody, and for their intensity and poignancy. The diction used is mellifluous. I would like to wish you goodbye today with the famous rhymed couplet of Shad Azimabad, the medieval name of Patna. ढूंढोगे अगर मुल्कों मुल्कों में, मिलने के नहीं नायाब हैं हम। ढूंढोगे अगर मुल्कों मुल्कों में, मिलने के नहीं नायाब हैं हम। ताबीर है जिसकी हसरतो गम, ऐ हम नफ्सों वो ख्वाब है हम. Thank you. I am poised to see you soon.